You know of the Arsenal and Bayer Leverkusen Invincibles. But before them, Ajax went unbeaten in the 1994-95 season, and one could argue that they did it better than Arsenal and Leverkusen did. A statement like that might have you asking, how good were the Ajax Invincibles? So, let us tell you the story of one of the greatest teams in the history of club football. Louis van Gaal might not have the best reputation anymore, especially after his spell at Man United and his beef with Messi and the Argentina national team at the 2022 World Cup. But back in the 80s, he was sort of the Pep Guardiola before Pep Guardiola. And no, that's not a crazy statement to make. They have very similar managerial career paths, at least, at the beginning. A year after retiring from professional football in 1987, Van Gaal went into coaching. He started by coaching the youth team of Ajax, a club he'd previously played for, and after just 2 years, he was trusted to take charge of the first team. When Van Gaal became head coach of the Ajax first team in 1991, he was just 39 years old. He had no experience as a first-team coach, so he was sort of a gamble for a club as big as Ajax, but it turned out to be a very profitable gamble. In his first season, he won the UEFA Cup. The season after that, he won the KNVB Cup. And after that came his first ever league title in the 1993-94 season. That season, he also won the Dutch Super Cup. In 3 years, Louis van Gaal was able to build a team that was one of the best in the world, but they were not satisfied with being labeled as one of the best. They wanted to be the outright best. And did they achieve that? You bet they did. But the process was a little confusing. You see, in the summer of 1994, Ajax didn't do much business. They signed Fred Grim, who was only a backup goalkeeper to Edwin van der Sar. And then they signed defender Vincent Bogarde, who was never gonna walk into a defense that already had captain Danny Blind, Frank de Boer, Michael Reiziger, and Frank Rijkaard. So, you could hardly say that the team was massively improved in the window, but they didn't care. They had a good team and were determined to do better than they'd ever done. And, well, they started the season on the best note by winning the Dutch Super Cup, beating Feyenoord 3-0 in the final. Bear in mind that Feyenoord had finished second in the league and won the KNVB Cup the previous season, so they were one of the best teams in the land. Ajax beating them so comfortably in a final was a statement of intent. It was a sign of things to come from Ajax in the 1994-95 season, but even if other teams could see it, they just could not stop it. Ajax started their Eredivisie title defense with a 3-1 win against RFC Waalwijk. And then in their second game of the season, they went up against Vitesse, who'd finished in the top 4 the previous season, and Ajax dismantled them 5-0. Whoa! And they weren't just brilliant in the league, you know? They were also very good in the Champions League. In their opening game of the new campaign, they were drawn to face defending champions AC Milan. It was the biggest test of all very early in the season, but Ajax came out unscathed, snatching the 3 points and leaving with a clean sheet in a 2-0 victory. But the start of their new season wasn't perfect. They stumbled in just their third league game, drawing against Roda JC. But they very quickly bounced back, beating FC Dordrecht 3-0 in the next game. That was the start of an impressive run. It felt like Ajax finally kicked into gear, and they just began to run everybody over. They had a 4-game run in the league and KNVB Cup where they didn't concede a single goal, winning all the games by an aggregate scoreline of 12-0. Ajax was showing real dominance on the pitch, both in the results and with the way they always dominated possession. Their first real test of the league season came when they faced fellow Dutch giants PSV away from home. But they made that test look super easy by coming out with a comfortable 4-1 win. If you didn't know they were serious, that right there should have given it away. These guys were just so unstoppable, and they went into each game with real hunger. But while Ajax were trampling upon the likes of Milan, PSV and Vitesse, one seemingly smaller club proved to be super difficult for them. Do you know what club that is? While you guess in the comments, quickly take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel, so you can see more content like this. Now, back to it. The club that proved to be tough for Ajax was a team from Austria named Casino Salzburg, what you now know as Red Bull Salzburg. They met in the group stage of the Champions League, and back-to-back games, Ajax were unable to secure a win from what appeared to be an easy game on paper. And it was crazy, because in that same group, Ajax beat Milan home and away with an aggregate scoreline of 4-0, but they couldn't beat Salzburg even once. It felt like they were Ajax's kryptonite. Both games ended in a draw, and the second of those draws came in the first week of November. And that ushered them into their worst period of the entire season. Ajax had started the campaign strongly, dominating and dazzling game after game, but they ended the year so unsure of themselves. It felt like they were burning out early. Between November and December, Ajax failed to win 4 of their 11 games. Now, this was easily their worst period of the entire season, but they still didn't lose. They just couldn't lose. Even when they weren't their best selves, that Ajax team was still indomitable. At the turn of the new year, Ajax had still not recorded a single loss in all competitions. They were top of the Eredivisie table, topped their Champions League group to make it to the knockout rounds, and were also in the knockout rounds of the KNVB Cup. For Ajax and their fans, life was great. They drew their first game of the new year, but when the tough games came around, they were ready. Between January and February, Ajax faced each of the teams that finished 2nd to 4th on the Eredivisie table the previous season: PSV, Vitesse, and Feyenoord, and they won every one of those games. It was a very tough run, but Ajax coming out with wins in all of those games made people begin to think that this could be a season for the books. In the media, there were talks about the possibility of Ajax going the entire season without losing a single game. Could they do it? No Dutch club had ever gone an entire season without losing a game in the modern era. The only team who'd ever done it in the history of Dutch football was Ajax, when they went the entire 1918-1919 season without losing a single game. But there was something about this season that was proving to be special. As of February, Ajax had still not lost a game in all competitions, so there were talks about the possibility of completing the European treble in the same season. That would almost certainly cement their place as the greatest football club ever. But it was all just too good to be true. On the 8th of March 1995, Ajax went up against Feyenoord in a single-leg quarter-final fixture in the KNVB Cup. And Feyenoord had already lost to Ajax twice that season with an aggregate scoreline of 7-1, were out for revenge. Ajax had pretty much already wrapped up the league, so Feyenoord were determined to take the domestic cup from them. The game was a very tight one, and both teams were inseparable after 90 minutes. But after 120 minutes of football, Ajax were finally handed their first loss of the season. They got knocked out of the cup after a 2-1 loss to Feyenoord, and that ended their 32-game unbeaten run in all competitions that season. Of course, a loss like that was not good for morale. Your first loss of the entire season coming in a one-off knockout game and costing you a trophy can be very demoralizing. But Ajax were not down for long. 3 days after that loss, they bounced back with a win in the league against go-ahead Eagles. And then 4 days after that, they beat Hajduk Split 3-0 to advance to the semi-finals of the Champions League. In the semis, they were drawn to face Bayern Munich, and of course that was always going to be a very tough test. And to make matters a little worse, they did not go into the first leg of that tie very motivated. Just 4 days before their game in Germany, Ajax drew against Heerenveen in the league. And sadly, the first leg against Bayern ended in the same way. Were they going to throw it all away just a month till the end of the season? Never! Louis van Gaal went back to the drawing board and summoned that brutal side of Ajax that we saw at the beginning of the season. This was the final lap. They'd lost the KNVB Cup, and that was sad, but they still had the league and the Champions League in their hands. They just needed to lock in and finish up the job. And, well, they did lock in. After that draw against Bayern, we saw a very different and even more dominant Ajax. They let the world know that they were bloodthirsty by winning their next game 7-0, and the one after that 4-2. When they welcomed Bayern Munich to Amsterdam for the return leg, Ajax were brimming with confidence, and that showed in their game as they beat Bayern Munich 5-2 and earned a place in the final for the first time in over 2 decades. And guess who they were to face in the final? AC Milan. I mean, they'd beaten Milan twice already that season, keeping clean sheets in both games, but it felt like their luck might just run out in the one-off knockout game as it did against Feyenoord. Were Ajax gonna let that happen? Well, that's a story for later. They were first focused on wrapping up the league without losing, and they went on to do that insanely. Ajax won their final 7 games of the league with an aggregate scoreline of 28-5. They were just destroying everyone on their way to claiming the record, and that run included a 5-0 win against Feyenoord. That one surely felt like sweet revenge. Anyway, with a 3-1 win against FC Twente in the final game of the league season, Ajax completed a full Eredivisie campaign without losing a single game. No other club in the history of Dutch football had ever managed that feat. They were invincible. But that invincible team had one more job: to also finish the Champions League season unbeaten and win their first European Cup in 22 years. They were up against defending champions AC Milan, and it was indeed a very tough game. Both defenses were inseparable for most of the game, but an 18-year-old Patrick Kluivert came off the bench and scored the only goal of the game in the 85th minute, snatching the trophy for Ajax with just 5 minutes left of normal time. That wrapped up a truly incredible season. To win the league and the Champions League without losing a single game was an unbelievable achievement. This was easily one of the best football teams in history. I mean, these guys lost only 1 game all season, and even then Feyenoord needed extra time to beat them. It was just special. And you know what made it even more special? Louis van Gaal was able to do this with a good part of the first 11 being academy graduates. Edwin van der Sar, Clarence Seedorf, Edgar Davids and Patrick Kluivert were all products of the Ajax Academy, and they were major parts of that record-breaking squad. So, you see, Van Gaal at Ajax and Guardiola at Barcelona had a whole lot in common. But while Pep won the treble, Van Gaal was invincible. Speaking of invincibles, of course Ajax are not the only team who were invincible. They weren't even the first. Click on this video and we'll tell you the story of 6 teams who turned invincible. Thanks for watching. Hit the like and subscribe button to show your support.